Imagine communities with traditions stretching back centuries, suddenly encountering the fast-paced, complex world of modern democracy. How do they adapt? What changes? And, what remains steadfast? Today, we're taking a deep dive into this fascinating and often really challenging interaction between traditional tribal life and modern democratic institutions in India. We'll explore how these communities respond, the significant problems they face, from losing their ancestral land to battling health crises and educational gaps, and even the surprising, sometimes controversial role NGOs play in all of this.
Yeah, and our insights today, they come from comprehensive analyses, detailed case studies, various reports, basically sources that really shed light on these critical issues. They offer you a clear, hopefully nuanced picture of the struggles, but also the incredible resilience of tribal populations.
Right. Our mission. To unpack the most important nuggets of knowledge from these sources, understand the surprising facts, and help you grasp the why behind these complex dynamics. Our goal is for you to walk away well-informed without feeling, bogged down in information overload. So let's jump right in. Okay, so to start, when traditional tribal life meets modern democratic institutions, it's definitely not a single straightforward story. It's not just simple integration. Our sources describe a fascinating spectrum, really, of how these two very different worlds interact.
Exactly. And what's truly fascinating here is just how diverse these responses are. We see, broadly speaking, three main approaches. Some communities choose to integrate or collaborate, others resist and compete, and many find a pragmatic way to, well, compromise or adjust. Let's talk about integration or collaboration first. This tends to happen when tribes voluntarily accept modern ideas because they don't see them as a threat to their core identity. A prime example is the policy of reservations, in jobs, education, political representation. These are actually supported by constitutional provisions like the 5th and 6th schedules, PISA, that's the Panchayat's Extension to Scheduled Areas Act, and the Forest Rights Act. And often these laws explicitly promote the continuity of traditional tribal life, even within this modern framework. Then on the other hand, you have competition or outright resistance. This happens when tribes feel their way of life is being fundamentally challenged or undermined. We've seen this in movements like Pathalgati, where communities literally assert their traditional governance. They erect these stone plaques marking their land and laws.
Kind of saying, this is our space, our rules.
Precisely. Or think about demands for autonomy, like the Gorkhaland movement. That really kicked off when the West Bengal government made Bengali a compulsory language in schools. For the Gorkhas, this was seen as a direct threat to their unique cultural identity, sparking widespread protests.
And there's another really compelling example of this deep resistance, isn't there, with the Naga urban local body elections. After 2004, no elections were held for 20 years. That's incredible what was going on
That's
then.
a powerful illustration, yeah. For 2 decades, male Naga leaders resisted a constitutional provision mandating 1/3 women's reservation in these bodies. They cited their customary laws and Article 371A, which grants Nagaland special status and protects its traditional practices.
So a direct clash between modern law and traditional custom.
A huge tussle. But eventually, a multi-stakeholder meeting in 2022, and crucially, this included the Naga Mothers Association, led to a decision. They decided to implement women's reservation, finally allowing elections to happen in July 2024. It was a long, hard-fought battle, showing how profound resistance can be. And finally, the third way is compromise or adjustment. This is really about finding a middle ground, what our sources call a functional division of responsibilities. For example, among some Goan communities, the traditional political systems handle internal affairs, things like marriage rules or inheritance within their community, while the modern Panchayati Raj institutions, the local governments, manage broader developmental initiatives. They sort of acknowledge their own limitations in finance management, for instance.
So practical coexistence.
Exactly. It's a pragmatic way to coexist.
Okay, so we've seen how these traditional and modern worlds can collide or connect: integration, resistance, compromise. But the real heart of our deep dive today is what happens to the people caught in the middle. What are the profound challenges they face when these forces meet? When problems arise for these communities, are they just isolated incidents, or do they, cascade into something bigger?
That's precisely the core question. Our sources show that tribal problems are very often part of a vicious cycle. One issue feeds directly into another, and the most fundamental problem, really the starting point of this cycle, is often land alienation, loss of land. The critical takeaway here, maybe the most important thing to grasp, is that tribal problems aren't isolated incidents. They're a deeply interconnected chain reaction, and the loss of land acts as that primary trigger, potentially unraveling their entire way of life.
Yeah, because land is so much more than just property for many tribes, isn't it? It's their identity, their source of income, their spiritual connection, the foundation of their social life. So when that's gone, well, everything else follows. It's like pulling the first thread in a sweater. The whole thing can just unravel.
Absolutely. Let's look at how this foundational loss of land actually occurs. First, there's the exploitation of legal loopholes. Despite safeguards we mentioned, the 5th and 6th schedules, PISA, the Forest Rights Act, these legal protections are often cleverly sidestepped. A common method is something called benami transfers. Basically, land is bought in the name of an unsuspecting tribal person, often without their knowledge.
Wow.
Yeah, for instance, Videocon tried to set up a hydropower plant in Chhattisgarh. They bought 28 hectares, apparently, in the name of a man named Belam Singh. He was a daily wage laborer living far away, had absolutely no idea he was suddenly a rich landowner on paper.
Unbelievable.
And it doesn't stop there. Even things like marital alliances or adoptions are used. Non-tribals marry or adopt tribal individuals just to gain land rights, only to transfer the land later. Second, there's massive development-induced displacement. Huge projects like dams, mining operations often force tribes from their ancestral lands. Take the Haria coal mining area. It's literally burning underground. It forces migrations. But many tribals end up staying nearby as landless laborers, and their life expectancy drops to a shocking 35, 36 years because of the toxic conditions.
Just devastating.
And another really striking example, the Saharia tribes. They were displaced twice from the Kuno Wildlife Reserve, once for the reserve itself, years ago, and then again more recently for the introduction of cheetahs brought from Africa.
That sounds like a profound moral dilemma. I mean, do the sources get into the arguments for why this kind of displacement is sometimes seen as necessary for, say, national development? How does that clash with the tribal experience?
They certainly highlight that tension, yeah. From a national development perspective, these projects, dams, mines, even conservation areas are often seen as vital. For energy, infrastructure, protecting biodiversity, they're meant to benefit the wider population. But for the tribal communities living there, it's a direct conflict with their very existence, their history, their culture. Then there's the dismal state of land records, and even some environmental conservation initiatives. Poor land records just make it easy for outsiders to encroach, to simply claim tribal land because the paperwork is messy or non-existent. And ironically, even well-intentioned government actions, like declaring national parks, Similipal Tiger Reserve as an example, can end up displacing forest-dwelling tribes. The Mankidias, they're a particularly vulnerable tribal group. They rely on the forest. They were forced out of Similipal because their traditional practice of using siali leaves to make ropes was deemed a threat to the elephant food supply.
Even though it's likely a sustainable practice they'd done for generations?
Exactly. And finally, the settlement of refugees and internal tribal conflicts also play a big role in land alienation. Sometimes outsiders or refugees are settled in tribal areas by the government, leading to conflict and displacement. Sri Lankan Tamils were settled in Andaman and Nicobar, for instance. This led to conflicts where the original tribal inhabitants literally became, quote, refugees in their own land. You see similar issues in Northeast India with Burmese and Bangladeshi refugees, like the large influx of Rohingya and Kuki refugees in Mizoram recently, and internal tribal conflicts themselves cause massive displacement. Think of the intense Kuki-Meitei conflict in Manipur, or the Brunizo conflict back in 1997 in Mizoram. That conflict forced something like 37,000 Bru tribes people into neighboring Tripura.
It sounds like the ripple effects of losing land are just devastating.
Yeah.
What does that kind of deep disruption mean for the individual, for their community, beyond just the economic loss?
The impact is truly, truly devastating. A scholar, Michael Sarnia, describes it as an 8-fold impact. It starts with landlessness, obviously, losing their main asset, but that leads straight to homelessness, then joblessness. And crucially, it leads to what he calls the disarticulation of social networks, the tearing apart of their communities, their support systems, their social fabric.
Everything falls apart.
Pretty much. And finally, there's significant marginalization, extreme vulnerability. For example, think about tribal construction workers who migrate to cities. They're often invisible to the law. If their children get kidnapped, maybe for organ trafficking or prostitution, there are often no birth certificates, sometimes not even photos to identify them. It highlights just how marginalized they become. And this profound stress, this disruption, it literally gets under their skin. It affects their biology. Studies on displaced Saharas, for instance, found shortened telomeres. Those are the protective caps on our chromosomes, like the tips on shoelaces.
Right, I've heard of those. Shorter telomeres are linked to faster aging and disease.
Exactly. It indicated accelerated aging at a cellular level, making them far more susceptible to diseases like pulmonary TB. It's the physical manifestation of that immense stress. It also deeply impacts women. They often lose status when their traditional role, maybe as gatherers tied to the forest, is lost. And when they have to work outside the traditional structures, maybe in those cities, they face increased vulnerability to sexual exploitation, even disrespect within their own communities sometimes. The very demography of tribes is affected. Declining populations, poorer sex ratios due to complex factors like female infanticide in some areas, high infant mortality. It's a bleak picture stemming from that initial loss of land.
Wow. The loss of land, as you've so powerfully illustrated, it doesn't just hit their livelihood, it truly unravels their entire social and economic fabric. This, I imagine, leads directly into a profound economic crisis for many.
Absolutely, directly. The data tells a really stark story. About 43% of scheduled tribes in India live below the poverty line. That's a huge number. And over 80% of tribal households suffer from indebtedness. It's a deep, widespread economic struggle.
80% indebted.
It's staggering. And the causes are deeply rooted. It goes back to the introduction of a monetary economy during colonial rule, which disrupted traditional barter systems. Then add land alienation, which we just discussed, and the entry of moneylenders, who often exploit the situation, offering high-interest loans that lead to bonded labor, essentially modern slavery. Even today, loopholes in money lending laws persist. Plus, tribes often lack awareness of formal financial institutions like banks, or if they are aware, they face complicated procedures, maybe indifferent or even hostile banking professionals.
Barriers everywhere.
Right, add to that lower literacy rates sometimes, and social obligations, things like weddings or festivals that require significant spending, often push them into the hands of these lenders. So what are the solutions being proposed? The Kaka Committee, which was a key government expert group looking into tribal issues, suggests things like revising those money lending laws and promoting formal financial inclusion, getting tribes connected to cooperatives and banks in a way that works for them. A really great example of this, an innovative approach, is the banking correspondent service.
How does that work?
Well, you have bank professionals literally on motorbikes sometimes, visiting remote tribal areas. They carry small portable devices, and they can provide basic banking services right there. Deposits, withdrawals. It bypasses the need for people to travel long distances to a physical bank branch.
Bringing the bank to the people.
Exactly. Other recommendations include strengthening the public distribution system, the PDS to ensure access to fair-priced food and necessities, and crucially, promoting education, skill development, vocational training to create self-employment opportunities.
And here's a vital point you touched on. Ensuring tribes have direct access to larger markets for their products. This isn't just about, charity. It's about empowering them to earn a fair price for their work and skills.
Indeed. That direct market access is absolutely paramount. It can be transformative. Consider the Arula tribe in Tamil Nadu. They are renowned snake catchers. Amazing traditional knowledge. In fact, 2 Arula tribesmen were invited by the U.S. government to Florida back in 2017 to help them deal with an invasive python problem. They even received Padma Shri awards later for their global contribution.
Wow, international recognition for their unique skills.
Exactly. Yet back home in Tamil Nadu, despite these unique, globally valued skills, many Arulas are victims of bonded labor. Why? Often due to unresolved land rights issues. The data is stark. Only 74 out of over 1,000 land rights applications from Arulas had been accepted by October 2021.
So they have this incredible skill, recognized worldwide, but locally they're trapped in poverty and exploitation.
It highlights this huge disconnect, doesn't it? Which is why initiatives like Pradhan and NGO are so important. Working with TriFed, that's a government body supporting tribal livelihoods, Pradhan helped a group of Kondh women in Odisha. These women were selling stitched leaf plates, Dona Patel, earning maybe just 500, 600 rupees a month, pennies. Pradhan helped them negotiate a direct contract with the huge Tirupati Devasthanam Trust, which uses millions of these plates. They also provided machines to improve efficiency. The result? Their income boosted 3 to 4 times almost immediately. That's the power of direct market linkage and support.
That's a fantastic example of what works, but it also throws the Arula situation into sharper relief. What innovative solutions could really help bridge that gap to ensure skills like the Arulas are genuinely valued and rewarded, not exploited?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Moving on, though, health and education are just fundamental pillars for any community's well-being, and tribal communities face immense struggles here. Let's look at the concerning data for health and hygiene first. Infant mortality stands at 44.4 per 1,000 live births for tribes. Under 5 mortality is 57.2. These are significantly higher than the national average. And life expectancy for some particularly vulnerable tribal groups, the PVTGs, can be shockingly low, sometimes just 35 years.
30 to 35 years.
It's hard to even comprehend. Chronic malnutrition is widespread. Over half of young tribal children are underweight or stunted, and many tribal women show signs of chronic malnutrition, like having a body mass index or BMI below 18.5. This indicates a lifetime of not getting enough nutrition. The causes are, well, stark. Poor social indicators are a big part of it. Lack of access to safe tap water, only about 10.7% of households have it. Lack of toilets, just 17.4%. Lack of smoke-free cooking fuel, only 9.5%.
Basic amenities that many take for granted.
Absolutely. And traditional worldviews, while culturally important, can sometimes act as barriers to modern healthcare practices. Among the Saharias, for example, there's a belief that women are polluted after childbirth. So they might avoid breastfeeding for the first 3 days, feeding the baby honey instead. This, sadly, contributes to high infant mortality. Or in a Naga village, there's an annual bat hunt festival. Thousands of bats are killed and consumed. From a public health perspective, this poses a significant risk for the emergence of new viruses, things like Nipah, or even another COVID-like situation.
A real clash between tradition and health risks.
Definitely. On top of that, healthcare facilities in tribal areas are often dysfunctional. They might be too far away, lack staff, lack medicines, or face huge language barriers between healthcare providers and patients. There's a movie called Damon, which tells the true story of a doctor, Dr. Omkar Hota. He had to physically carry a critically ill tribal woman for miles because the villagers wouldn't touch her after childbirth due to their beliefs about pollution.
Just incredible dedication, but highlights the systemic failures.
It does, and lack of health insurance coverage is another huge issue. For many tribal families facing a terminal illness, the only option seems to be praying for death rather than seeking unaffordable treatment. So what about solutions on the health front? Recommendations include empowering the local Gram Sabas, the village councils, to be involved in healthcare planning, making it more bottom-up. Creating a specific tribal health assembly has been suggested. Developing area-specific, tribe-sensitive health policies, not just one-size-fits-all. Dr. Apaibong, a really prominent healthcare activist who's dedicated his life to tribal health, proposed concepts like Orojaduts. These would be local health workers, similar to the Aishe workers we have now, but specifically for tribal areas. He also suggested an ST health card to ensure tribals can access treatment anywhere in the country, and an ST health index to actually track progress and hold systems accountable.
Okay, let's shift to education now. The statistics here are also telling, aren't they? While tribal literacy has definitely increased significantly over the decades from maybe 3.5% in 1951 to around 59% in 2011, it still lags way behind the national average. And the gross enrollment ratio tells a story too. It drops drastically from primary school, where it's quite high, actually over 100% sometimes, due to older kids enrolling.
Right, it's around 106.7% at primary level.
But then it plummets to about 74.5% in secondary school and down to just 15.4% in higher education. That indicates huge dropout rates along the way.
And there's a significant gender gap, too.
Yes, the causes are multifaceted and deeply concerning. Discrimination is a major issue. There was a case in Sonapadra, Uttar Pradesh, where Garcia tribal children were made to sit on the floor separate from other children in the classroom.
Just blatant segregation. Blatant. And shockingly, this isn't just in remote schools. Even professors at a prestigious university like JNU in Delhi were accused of systematically giving low scores to tribal students in MPhil entrance exams. Why? Allegedly to prevent them from pursuing PhDs based on a belief that they weren't, quote, cream candidates.
That's appalling. Bias right at the top.
Yeah. It shows how deep the prejudice can run. Then there's poverty, forcing children to drop out and work instead of attending school. Education is seen as a luxury they can't afford. You also have inadequate infrastructure, poor school buildings, lack of materials. Teacher absenteeism is a huge problem in remote areas, and often the quality of teachers is poor. Some may lack basic subject knowledge or, crucially, any cultural awareness or sensitivity. And residential schools, called ashram schools, which are intended to help by providing boarding and education. While they often suffer from corruption, mismanagement, and there have been horrific cases of sexual violence reported. Plus, these schools can create what scholars call cultural discontinuity. Children are often forced to learn in a language that isn't their mother tongue, which hinders their cognitive development, makes learning harder, and can even create a fear or aversion towards education itself. So, to address this education crisis, the Kaka Committee again emphasizes creating a single window interface. Basically, a one-stop shop for tribal students to access all educational benefits and scholarships, simplifying the process. Addressing the gender gap is key, maybe using tools like a gender atlas for tribal areas to pinpoint where girls are falling behind. And crucially, the committee recommends primary education in the mother tongue. This is so important for early learning and cognitive development. Odisha's Model Primer initiative is cited as a successful example here. They use dominant scripts, like Odia's script, to document tribal languages and then created teaching materials using local examples, local stories.
Making education relevant and accessible in their own language.
Exactly. Other suggestions include establishing tribal chairs in universities to promote research and understanding, and investing in training local people to become teachers in their own communities.
But here's a really thought-provoking twist you mentioned earlier. Even initiatives that seem beneficial on the surface can have hidden layers, maybe unintended consequences.
Right. Consider the Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences, or KISS, in Odisha. It's a massive institution providing free education, housing, food, healthcare to thousands of poor tribal youth. And it's widely credited with preventing many of these young people from joining the Naxalite movement. That's a significant left-wing extremist insurgency active in parts of India. So, on the surface, it seems like a huge success story.
Okay, that sounds positive, so where's the controversy?
Well, it faces criticism, particularly from anthropologists. They allege that KISS receives significant funding from large corporations, particularly those involved in mining in Odisha's resource-rich tribal areas. The allegation is that the funding isn't just for education as philanthropy, it's also, perhaps subtly, intended to change the tribal value system, to make the youth less resistant to corporate activities like mining, which often displaces tribal communities and destroys their traditional lands. Some critics compare it to a modern-day Orientalist education policy, where education was used historically by colonial powers to reshape the culture of the colonized to make them more compliant.
Wow. So the idea is education as a tool for social engineering, potentially paving the way for resource extraction.
That's the allegation. It raises very complex questions about the motivations behind large-scale educational interventions, especially when corporate funding is involved in areas with resource conflicts.
That truly makes you wonder, doesn't it? What steps, then, are most crucial to make education a genuine pathway to opportunity for tribal youth, empowering them on their own terms? And how do we strike that incredibly difficult balance between preserving their rich traditional culture and providing access to modern education and healthcare? It seems like such a complex dance between progress and preservation. Okay, so let's quickly recap the key insights from our deep dive today. It's been a lot to cover. First, we explored those three main ways tribal life and modern democracy interact. Integration, like we saw with reservations policy. Resistance, powerfully shown by that 20-year Naga women's reservation struggle. And compromise, like the Goan communities finding a functional division of responsibilities.
Then, we really dug into the vicious cycle of tribal problems, identifying land alienation as often being the root cause, the starting point. This loss leads to that devastating eightfold impact described by Sarnia: landlessness, homelessness, joblessness, the tearing apart of communities, extreme marginalization. Remember the heartbreaking example of the construction workers' children who are almost invisible, and the physical toll seen in the Sahara's shortened telomeres reflecting that chronic stress and increased disease risk.
We also saw the dire state of poverty and indebtedness. Those staggering statistics, 43% below poverty line, over 80% in debt. We traced the historical roots back to colonial times and the introduction of cash economy. But we also looked at some hopeful solutions, innovative things like the banking correspondent service reaching remote areas, and the success story of the Pradhan NGO helping the Kamba women dramatically increase their income from selling Dona Patel leaves through direct market access, which contrasted so sharply with the situation of the globally recognized Irula snake catchers still facing bonded labor back home.
Exactly. And finally, we examined the critical challenges in health and education. We talked about traditional worldviews, sometimes clashing with modern medicine, like the Saharia practice of feeding honey instead of colostrum, or the viral risks associated with the Naga bat hunt. We discussed the terrible impact of discrimination in education, from segregated classrooms to bias in university admissions. We highlighted the absolute importance of mother tongue education using Odisha's model primer as a positive example. And we touched on that intriguing KISS Institute controversy, which really forces us to ask critical questions about corporate influence, cultural change, and the true purpose of education in these contexts.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, remember that understanding these complex interactions, these problems, it's not just about absorbing facts and figures. It's really about appreciating the incredible resilience of these communities, acknowledging the deep systemic challenges they face, and recognizing the nuances, the complexities of cultural change.
Yeah, the journey of tribal communities in India and indeed around the world is a really powerful lens. It helps us view development, social justice, and that delicate, often difficult balance between tradition and progress in our rapidly changing world.
So what's the one nugget of knowledge from today's deep dive that you'll carry with you? How might it change the way you see things? We really hope this deep dive has